And thanks everybody for coming out to hear us talk. And I'm going to talk about some insects in British Columbia and how that sort of fits in with the research we're doing. Specifically, some shoreline stuff that we've been doing recently in the entomology clinic. Shoreline insects are a good thing to study. I mean, all across the province, there's a lot of different microhabitats and areas that we're not certain about the insect and spider diversity. But the shoreline's a good place to start, not just because I like collecting on beaches because it's pretty and you might see a whale or some interesting shorebirds or something, but just because there's a lot of it. 25,000 kilometers of shoreline, if you count all the little islands all the way up the coast, that's a huge amount of shoreline. That's more than India, that's more than the United Kingdom. There's a lot of shoreline in BC, so just looking at that as a habitat will certainly fill many careers worth of work, so may as well fill mine. And one of the places I'm going to start with, and the story that I'm telling is kind of picking one shoreline location to sort of represent all of it, but you can imagine that there's going to be a lot more diversity across all the shorelines, but I'm picking one, and it's Calvert Island. It makes sense. It's right in the middle, which is great. You know, latitude and longitude, it's right in the middle of the shoreline. There you go, let's try that one. But also because that happens to be where we were working last summer. And we were working as part of the Hakai Terrestrial Bioblitz. The Hakai Institute is located on Calvert Island, and they wanted to have a Bioblitz. It's a research center they have. They have a number of different projects that go on. There's been a lot of marine work in the past looking at offshore vertebrates, offshore invertebrates, and they wanted to do a terrestrial survey. What kind of plants, fungi, animals are in the land around this place, and what's the best way for us to get a quick survey, but a comprehensive survey to do it? And they took the Bioblitz approach, and in this regard, that meant let's get as many interested, enthusiastic people here at the same time. Let's all work together and try to see what species are around here. And around here included a lot of places. I mean, this is the actual site there, the research station, which is where we were housed, and they had laboratories. But within, you know, a beautiful walk down here, you can get to a number of different beaches. Short boat trips, you can be out at this part of the island, and even longer boat trips, you can go out here to go to some of the highlands over here. So there was a lot of areas to look at, and this is just at the north end of one island, in the middle of the Great Bear Rainforest. And what it entailed was about 50 participants, and this included a number of us from the Royal BC Museum, but it also had people from government agencies, experts from other fields. They brought in whoever was available, botanists, fungal experts, and animal and insect people like us. And the diversity of how we collected was also big too. When you got that many people, you can collect in different ways in different places all at the same time. So this was hand netting, going out with the typical butterfly net and running and catching what you can find, but also some other trapping techniques, which involves setting up, you know, big screens that'll catch flying insects as they go through, pitfall traps that collect all the crawling insects that go through at night, sifting through soil, lots of different ways to collect it all at the same time. So what I want to present to you is just sort of what type of data can you get out of there? What kind of scientific questions can you answer through an event like this, and how does that help us to understand biodiversity in a big sense? So to do that, I'm going to pick one little subset because it's the subset I could study quicker, and it's the one I have the most experience with, and that's flies. So I'm going to just give you some Diptera data from that week. And you think, oh, well, flies, there's not going to be much. Like, even with the amount of data we had in that 1 week, I'm talking about 715 specimens in 1 week. So it's enough to present, don't worry. And then also with science, I mean, there's data, and that's great. You can present lots of data, but science really has to be driven by questions. So I needed a good question. And mine led back to the whole question of shorelines, and these are interesting. But then there's the question, like, do shorelines even matter? Like, is it really any different than collecting anywhere else? Especially if you're going to talk about flies. Like, really, are the flies on the beach different than the flies in the forest? And is that even worth making that distinction? So there was my question. Are the flies on the beach different than the flies in the forest? Do each of them tell us a different story about the biodiversity in the province? And I'm going to use these data from this week to ask that question. So the first question was, and this is some data up here, and I can explain it to you, was did we do a good job of capturing what was there? I mean, there was a lot of us. There were 50 people. Not everyone was collecting insects. A lot of people were spending their time collecting lichens and identifying them. But through all of our efforts over this week, do you think we got a lot of the stuff that's there? And you can ask that in different levels. At the family level, if you identify all the flies into different families like mosquitoes or house flies or horse flies, that's what we call the family level. And what this chart shows you as you go across here, here's each of the sites you're adding. So sites might be me with a net on one beach one day, or it might be Claudia with a pitfall trap in a different spot another day. And we call those two different sites. So that's how you get 21 sites over 7 days, was kind of different people doing different things in different locations. So if you take each of those 21 sites and you add how many new families are you adding with each new site. And that's what this is charting. And it kind of goes up and you add one and it adds more. The pink is just if you mathematically average it, if you randomly pick one versus picking a specific one. And what you start to see is as you go across and you add more and more sites, eventually it levels out. And what this means is that at some point, if we did an extra day, or if we collected, had one more person collecting on the same beach, is it likely they're going to add more families? And it plateaus out to show you probably not. Probably not adding any new families, which means we probably got all the families that were there at around 40 families of flies. You can do a statistical test here called a Chow test saying, if you mathematically average it out, how many fly families should you have gotten? And it said 42. So we probably got all of them. Species, not so much. We got 155 different species. It did not plateau out, and it could have been as many as 300 species. So that shows with a little bit more effort, maybe an extra day, a couple more interested people, better luck, it might have been up closer to 250 species. So it shows that even with an intense week, we still didn't get all of the species that were likely there. But did the data tell us anything about beaches versus shorelines? And quickly, just to point out, this is what we call a shoreline, this is what we call a forest. And not just nice sandy beaches with driftwood and beautiful piles of seaweed, but also things like dried out lagoons, mud flats on the edges, estuaries, anything out below the tree line towards the ocean we considered shoreline. And then forest would also be hilltops that are kind of barren or grassy, but also freshwater. There's a couple freshwater ponds we looked at. So that's the line we were looking at, is basically the trees as you go towards the ocean. And looking at raw numbers, it was about even with the number of sites. I'd like to think that I planned this out carefully, but no. I lucked out having about equal number of sites with forest versus beach. Slightly more specimens on the beach, but almost equal with the number of families. But were they different? There's our question. Is it actually different with the forest and the beach, or could I have done just as well staying in one of them? Family-wise, there's a lot of overlap, but there are still 6 families that you only find in the forest here in brown, 7 families we only ever found on a beach, which you're starting to get some sense they're different, and some of them make sense. Something like Celopidae, which are called seaweed flies. If you're from Atlantic Canada, you might call them kelpies, because you find them on kelp and seaweed. That's the only place you ever find them. You're not going to find them in the forest no matter how hard you try. Otherwise, you get things like Mycetophilidae, which are fungus gnats. You mostly find them on bracket fungus or decaying trees or something like that. Far more likely to only find them in a forest, not on a beach. So you're starting to get a line right there. At the species level, there was even less overlap. There were very few species that you could equally find in the forest or on the beach. And there's obviously a lot of things that are specialized to one or the other. In the forest, you get things like Hylamia alcatho. It's a fly. It's a dung fly. You find it on piles of scat in the forest. Sometimes you'll find it on decaying animals or something. Not that uncommon. You can find them in here in any given city park, but far more likely in the forest. You're not going to find it out on the beach because there's just not enough good dung out on the beach compared to in the forest. And other things like Cursidromia paralela, which is highly specialized to only be on a beach. It's a wingless fly. It's a predator. It runs around in between grains of sand looking for anything it can jump on and eat. It's specialized in the forest. These populations will not, and on the beach, it's not going to get into the forest no matter what. So here's a big distinction. If you want to look at the terrestrial biodiversity of something like Calvert Island or all of BC, if you only look at the forest or the beach, you're going to miss these species because they're just not detectable. All of this research was done in collaboration. I kept saying we because it is we. We have to collect, we have to identify, we have to prepare specimens, and that includes the people here at the museum. Collection manager Claudia Copley and I work in the collection. We have tons of volunteers. They're always in working with us. And this was collaborative too. Joanne brought that up at the beginning. This was with University of Victoria. They organized the Bioblitz. The people that run the Hakai Institute ran the Bioblitz as well. So all of these work are done in collaboration when we get in the field and then bring back our questions to present to folks like you. Thanks.